Hey guys, welcome back. Can you hear me all right? Let me know in the comments how my voice is coming through tonight, if I'm not being loud enough, if I'm too loud maybe. And if the music is overpowering the audio, let me know. So we've got quite a crowd so far right off the bat. I'm very curious to see how many of you guys drop out after we open the box. So I did cut it open already. That way we don't have to deal with the awkwardness of trying to show the whole box on screen and cut it open. I also briefly made sure there wasn't like any message on top of the box saying don't show this to people yet. So what we'll do today is we'll take out the contents of this box. We will look at whatever's in there, and then I think we'll start building it. Depending on what it is, we probably won't get all the way through building it tonight. I hate to say it, but I really doubt it ends up being the Giant, just because those don't come out till next month. And normally Bellum doesn't send out pre-release stuff until a week or two before stuff releases. But let's see. It would certainly be very awkward if there was a head in here or something like that. Anyway, so we'll start off. We have stuffing. I'll throw that away. Got base plates, so obviously it's something infantry based. Got the instructions. And we've got the cards, and it looks like we are doing the Varangian Guard - Athanatoy kit. So there you go, there's your reveal. It does look like they sent us 2 copies of the set based on the cards. So let's take the sprues out here and get the box out of the way. Okay, so starting right off then, we'll dive into what we have here. Looks like each set is going to be 3 sprues plus a command sprue. So we'll start by looking at the command sprue. We've got an awesome banner here. I'm really happy with this banner. The other Old Dominion banners that we have are pretty lackluster because they're more like a metal icon. This is the first time we've gotten an Old Dominion banner in an infantry kit that actually, has designs on it and is actually fabric. The weapons are pretty cool. I'm really loving the axes, and even the swords are really cool looking. Got some very nice looking heads. What's going to be interesting about these kits, if you can tell, like this head right here, he's got a beard coming out from underneath the helmet. Now that's going to be a lot of fun to paint because I'm going to have to go figure out how I want to do an undead beard. We have 2 of those sprues in here. And then let's look at the main sprue. I can agree with you there, Texas Wargaming. These sculpts on these kits are just amazing. Oh wow. I don't know how well you guys can see that, but look at that, the scale, or the lamellar on these guys. Almost called it scale mail there. It's basically, it's like they took the lamellar that appears on the Cataphracti and just shrunk it down, and it turned out really good. I'm really excited for that. It's going to be a lot of fun to paint. We've also got fur on these models, which we haven't seen on other Old Dominion. Outside of some of the characters have it. I think the Strategos is wearing a fur pelt. Switch to the other side of the sprue here. The bodies are labeled. Looks like there's 4 bodies to a sprue. I'm happy about that. That was one thing I didn't like about the Legionnaire kit, was that they did 3 bodies to a sprue, and so you ended up with 4 sprues, and it made it so that there was usually a repetition model, like a model that has the same shield as somebody else on the stand, or the same body. You won't run into that with these guys because they have 4 bodies per sprue, which means 4 different body poses. So you're asking if they have sidearms. Not that I can see. It looks like really it's either just you build them with the 2-handed axes as the Varangian Guard, or you build them with the sets of swords if you're doing the Athanatoi. Now luckily, since they've sent me 2 kits of them, I'm going to build a squad of each. Okay, now let's make sure that all these... I'm pretty sure all these sprues are just duplicates of the same thing. So we don't need to look over all 6 of them individually. But we will look at the instructions real quick. See how they go about assembling these ones. Looks pretty straightforward. Try not to block out the light too much. My camera's being a little bit weird here. So pretty straightforward instructions. Looks like all of the variants of these guys go together in 4 steps. So going to be pretty easy to build these ones. So let me know what you guys want to see us build. We can build these as either the Varangians or the Athanatoi. I don't know if I have a preference, personally, since I'm going to be building both squads eventually anyway. The Varangians have actual helmets, and then the Athanatoi are just death masks over their faces. And then they've got these fancy little decorative ornamental bits coming off the back of their head. So the difference rules-wise, let me open up my rule book here. The main difference aesthetics-wise is the weapon. The Varangian Guard are packing the 2-handed axes, and then the Athanatoi are going Florentine with dual swords. And then rules-wise, give me a minute, I'm just opening up and digging through all my rulebooks. So I like to print all of my Conquest rules, and I have this giant binder that has all of the rules for all of the armies in it. And it's mostly organized, but sometimes it takes me a minute to thumb through and find the right army. Here we go, Old Dominion. So the Athanatoi and Varangian Guard. Looks like Athanatoi, at a glance, they are defense 2, so they're lower defense than the Varangians. The Varangians are defense 3. 4 wounds per stand on the Athanatoi versus 6 wounds on the Varangian. The Athanatoi do more attacks with 6 attacks per stand versus the Varangians' 4 attacks. Athanatoi are Clash 2, Varangians Clash 3. They both have the same movement and no volley. Both have Animate Vessel. Athanatoi have the Bodyguard special rule and Flurry. Flurry is letting them reroll hits, and Bodyguards, off the top of my head, I don't remember what that one does. Varangian have Hardened 1, meaning that they ignore 1 cleave. They have Cleave 2, so enemies' saves are going to be worse by 2. And then their Memories of Old gives them an additional cleave, and they take on Line Breaker, which cancels out Shield and Bastion, I believe. And then the Athanatoi gain the counterattack special rule. So, based on their rules, I'm leaning towards the Varangian Guard. There's only a 10-point difference between the units. I like your idea there. We'll build one of each, I guess, and show them off. So, I guess we'll just do the first pose. And I might adjust the camera down slightly so that we can focus on what we're doing here. So we'll just start with the first pose. So we're looking for pieces 1 and 2, and I'm assuming this will also be body number 1. And hopefully these won't take us too insanely long to build, because they're pretty straightforward design. Piece number 2 is up here. Then this recommends we use arms 8 and 9, or no, 8 and 7. I can read instructions sometimes. So piece 7's up here. And piece 8 is down here. So one thing I'm already noticing with this kit, in some kits the pieces that are numbered similar will be next to each other. In this kit they seem to be somewhat close together, but not right next to each other. Okay, and then we need piece 5 and 6 for the fur. Piece number 5 is up here. You know, I was honestly kind of hoping for the Wadroon as well. Even though I play Old Dominion as my main army, I was kind of excited to paint some of those veterans on stream. I thought that would have been a lot of fun. I'll still do it eventually, because my wife plays Wadroon, so we'll definitely be getting that kit. It just won't be for a little while longer, because I didn't order one in advance this time around. I also feel like these guys will be less entertaining to watch me paint on a live stream, which we'll do next week. Just because I've already done a lot of tutorials on the Old Dominion. But I'm still excited to get to paint these. Like, they're cool models, and I'm sure they're going to add some fun playstyle variety to my army. Nope, that's not the right one. Okay, I'm looking for axe number 9 here. I wonder, because I'm not seeing it. Is that the command sprue one, maybe? No. Or maybe this is 9. 9 and 6 always confuse me on sprues like this, because there's not like a clear definite, or a clearly defined top, I guess you could say. So looks like a 6 from this angle, but then from this angle it's clearly a 9. They do put the little dot in the corner, but if you're not paying attention you'll miss it, like I just did. Okay, and then head number 3 is the one they recommend here. What do I think the new faction units are going to be? As in the ones that they're going to add to the army lists in the nearish future? Honestly, I have no idea. They're not far enough along in development for us to be playtesting them in the playtesting group yet. At least, not that I've been made aware of. Okay, so that's all the pieces on this first one. We're just going to go through and clean them up now. If I were to speculate, I think the 100 Kingdoms, I would like to think that maybe they're going to get something a little bit larger for their army. Because they're going to start with the 100 Kingdoms and the Spires. Those are the two armies that are the closest to having all their units released. And I know that in our surveys that we take as vanguards, they did ask about ideas for monster units for the 100 Kingdoms a few months back. So that would be one of my speculations. I think we could see some sort of monster be added for the 100 Kingdoms. Spires, I honestly have no idea. I don't follow their lore closely enough to be able to identify units that exist in the lore that aren't in their rule packet yet. So I think sorcerers are going to be a really fun army. I think they're going to have some fun units. I'm looking forward to their brutes and their monsters the most. Because we know they're going to be getting cavalry, because according to the lore we've been given, the kind of lower class of their nation are like cavalry raiders that live on the outskirts of their continent. And we've seen in the concept art lots of cool cavalry, so I kind of suspect they're going to be like kind of like the 100 Kingdoms, in that the 100 Kingdoms have a lot of cavalry. But then they're also going to have monsters that I would hope are going to be comparable to like the Nord Jotnars. Because if we think about what they're going to get for their monsters, we know that there's going to be some sort of djinn that's going to be monster-sized, which I imagine will look a lot like the preview model that we got to see during the voting, but bigger and probably more detailed. And then they have those the brute units we saw in their concept art. Those look like they're going to be fun. Forearms and big swords. I have no clue how they're going to play. Like, I would wager that the army right now is in very early, maybe rules design. It's for sure in concept art and initial, like, early sculpts right now. Just based off of kind of the pace they've moved at in the past. I'm sure they've at least decided what the units are going to be and have started trying to develop more finalized concept art for them. But they've kept it pretty quiet. Like, nothing's been mentioned in the playtesting chat. Right now, we're mostly working on further updates to the tournament pack. Because the stuff they updated for you guys was kind of just like almost more like a hot fix to prepare for Adepticon. I think Bellum wants to get through Adepticon before they get too far into any further testing. I think I'm trying to think back. We did see some war elephants in the concept art for the Sorcerer Kings, I believe. And I could see that being one of their monsters as well. And that monster would probably function similar to maybe a Tauntaur, but smaller. Just in my speculation, because it's going to be kind of one of those creatures with a saddle and like guys shooting off the back of it. So I would imagine it, rules design-wise, it would be similar to the Tauntaur. Then their infantry, I don't even know what to expect from their infantry. I expect probably see some good archer units. And I'm hoping we see some, in the concept art we saw some sort of almost Chinese style armor on some of the cavalry riders. I'm hoping we see some infantry in that same design. Now, Hades, you mention a griffin. I think, personally, that the griffin will eventually come to Conquest, but I think it's going to be part of the city-states. Because there was a griffin-like creature shown in the concept art of the city-states. So I think when the city-states get all of their current units out, I think the griffin will show up in their army down the road. Now that's several years, like, it's not even really worth worrying about right now. But that's just my opinion. I think they're trying to be very careful with the idea of monsters for the 100 Kingdoms. Because lore-wise, the 100 Kingdoms, they're not an army that uses, giant beasts. They just aren't. They are very much designed and intended to be vanilla humans with nothing really special about them in terms of, magical powers and stuff. They're just vanilla. And that's good, in my opinion. That's what grounds the game and makes sure that there's an element of believability to things. I personally hope that if they ever do a war machine, it's something like, I don't know, maybe a chariot, similar to what the city-states are getting, but maybe a slightly larger version of it, or a carriage, or something that's got some sort of ranged weapon on it. And I mean, we could also see like siege equipment, but the argument that I've heard the most when we've discussed siege equipment is that it doesn't really fit the setting of the game, because Conquest is not meant to be... The main gameplay is not meant to represent a siege. It's meant to represent two armies that are meeting out on an open field somewhere and fighting. And normally, siege equipment you would build on site when you know that you're going to be in a long siege. So Hades, I do agree with you. Like, you can certainly make something believable and still be very high fantasy. I think it comes down to the fact that the lore for the 100 Kingdoms was established early on in the game, because they were the first army, and at the time there weren't as many monsters running around. There was really only the Abomination, and so it felt more unique and played better when there were less monsters running around. Whereas now I think the game has evolved, and when everybody else has access to a monster and they don't, I can see how it does feel out of place. If they were going to do a monster, I think something like a griffin would make the most sense. From a kind of stereotypical standpoint, I guess, because it's kind of... Warhammer Fantasy has made it the stereotype that, like, the Bretonnians and Empire would have cavalry and then their griffins. And I wonder if part of the motivation is Parabellum just trying to avoid looking like a ripoff of Old World Warhammer. And if that was a motivation, I doubt they would ever come out and say that. You know, I shouldn't have put this head on yet. Let's put that on later. So the instructions say to put the arms on after the body pieces are glued together. Turns out if you follow the steps in the instructions, your model goes together a little bit better. Who knew? Okay, I think I understand what you're saying, Hades. And I think it's easy for us as consumers to say, well, why don't you just design it one way? I think Parabellum, one thing that they do well is that they do stick to their guns. Once they've decided on a way they want their game to be, for the most part they stick to it. But they also do know when to pivot. And I think if 100 Kingdoms do get a monster, or if we do start to see more crazy unit designs, I think that would be them, kind of owning up to the fact that their fan base wants something different than what they want to give us. And that's one thing I do like about Parabellum, is that when there is something that needs to be fixed, they do fix it. Okay, so these hands are a little awkward to glue on. I know we keep jumping around subjects here. That's kind of how these streams go when we're building models. So when you guys build your own on these guys, I almost recommend using super glue instead of plastic glue on the hands, just because of how kind of weirdly placed they are. Because if I bump this right now, it's just going to fall off. And it'll take a few minutes for it to set like that. Probably should have also put the cloak on before putting this on, but it's okay. So I think you've got to have a good balance between, small basic humans and big fantastic things. Because I know, so I like Age of Sigmar. I played that. That used to be my main fantasy game for a long time. But I know that a lot of people that did play, old Warhammer Fantasy were sad to see that, yes, humans still exist, but they're just very underrepresented. And now Games Workshop is trying to go back, and I think they're probably struggling to design their free guild and all their city-states, or not city-states, cities of Sigmar. I think they're struggling to design those in a way that fits with the gameplay, but also has them be narratively at the power level they should be. Because Age of Sigmar did kind of escalate the power level of their creatures and their armies a little too much. And I think Conquest does a little bit better job of balancing it. Especially as we see the newer armies, they are leaning more into the fantasy aspect more and more with each army. Because we saw the 100 Kingdoms at the beginning and the Spires, both very, well, at least the 100 Kingdoms were very grounded. The Spires can get a little over the top. And then we saw the Nords very grounded, but with elements of fantasy. And then we've seen them just slowly go more and more into the fantasy, the Sorcerer Kings are a good example, because I think they're going to be packed full of all sorts of creatures. Same with the Hell in the last round of voting. That army was just packed full of non-human stuff running around. And I think we'll see that shift more and more. I think with each army they'll get a little bit more out there. They've played through a bunch of their safer bets where they're armies that people will relate to more, and now they're going to start going out into their more abstract ideas, and I think that'll be great. I think Age of Sigmar has always kind of struggled with its identity. When it first launched, they really tried to push it as its own thing, but they got backlash because of the way they did it, I think. And I think they've been trying to almost play catch-up ever since, because a lot of other fantasy games gained a lot of ground when Sigmar first launched. I personally really like Sigmar's setting. I like that it's not as many basic humans. It makes it different from some of my other games that I play. Anyway, here is one of the Varangian guards. I was just looking it over, admiring it. These are actually a lot cooler in person than I thought they would be. When I saw their pictures, like their art, they looked cool, but they also was like a little bit of hesitation where I'm like, these don't quite fit with the rest of my Old Dominion. But now seeing them in person, I'm much happier with them. Okay, we're going to put the lid back on the glue here. Now we're going to work on, I'll grab a different sprue, and we're going to cut out the same pieces, but this time for the Athanatoi. Okay, so pieces 1 and 2 again. Is it sad that even though we just barely cut out these same pieces, it took me a minute to find the body on here? So, I know this is kind of like the middle of the, well, it's actually the beginning of the week. We're only on Tuesday. I normally would do this on Friday, but are any of you guys working on any cool projects? I know it's not the weekend, so some of you might not be working on anything. But I'd be interested to hear if you are working on anything cool right now. There it is. Man, that took me a minute to find that piece. Now let's see, if we're doing the Athanatoi, does it tell us? It does have different arms. Okay. So it wants us to use arms 14 and 15. Let's see if we can find those. 15's over here. And 14 is actually right next to it. That's nice. Makes it easier. So Hades, if you're looking for a budget mic, I guess it depends on what you consider budget. I personally use the blue Snowball. At the time that I bought it, it was only, I don't know, 70 or 80 bucks. I don't know what it is now. May have gone up in price, may have gone down. Who knows? But I've been pretty happy with it. It's only one directional, so it doesn't pick up a ton of background sound. Like, it picks up some, but not as much as it could. And then as far as video editing, I use Power Director by Cyberlink, I think. No, I'm gonna have to look at who it's from, but it's called Power Director 365, and I've found it to be pretty straightforward. I'm mostly self-taught on video editing. I've never done anything, I've never had any formal training on it. Okay, so the Athanatoi definitely use less of the pieces because they don't use the fur cloaks. So, getting all tongue-tied here, and my brain's moving faster than I can keep up with. Power Director is a paid one. I buy it by the year, so I pay for a year at a time. I found that the paid services were worth the money just because of all the royalty-free sound effects and music that they give you. Because trying to get your own music, like even YouTube's music now, yeah, it's free-ish, but every time you include one of YouTube's songs, you have to keep track of if it's actually free, if it's one where it's free but you give part of your monetization earnings to the owner of the music, or if it's just flat out paid. You also have to pay attention to expiration dates of licenses when you use YouTube's free stuff, whereas the paid platform has it all secured, and like the actual company that you're buying the software from owns the music. So for that aspect, I've found it worth paying to get an actual program. But that's just my opinion. So the box ended up having the Varangian Guards - Athanatoi. We're building one of the Athanatoi now, and this is one of the Varangians. I'd have to go back and look at what I bought Hades and what I've paid for and what I've subscribed to, because I don't remember off the top of my head, if I'm being completely honest. Because it has been probably about 10 months since the last time I had to deal with any renewal stuff. And I've only ever had one song that I used that kind of got flagged. I don't know if that was just an error on YouTube's part or what, but they didn't demonetize it. They just said, hey, you don't own this song, and then it had no effect. Chimera, it sounds like you've got some fun projects going. I'm getting ready to order my second box of the Caryatids. I've been enjoying them. They've added a fun bit of tactical flexibility to my Old Dominion army. No, so these are for the Old Dominion. Yeah, so they're kind of like, if I understood it correctly, narratively, like lore-wise, the Varangian Guards are like the successors to the Praetorian Guard, and then the Athanatoi are the elite of the Varangians, or I might have that reversed. But these are coming out in the next week or so for the Old Dominion. And I think we just have the head and the little head dress left, and then we can glue this guy together. So, in the future, if Bellum ever sends me more preview models, do you guys want me to just reveal ahead of time what they send me? Or do you guys like the suspense? Was it disappointing that it wasn't what you wanted today? You know, let me know in the comments, in the chat, what you guys think. There's a part of me that feels kind of guilty, like maybe it was mean of me to wait to open the units until you guys were all here watching. Almost felt kind of clickbait-ish. And I don't want to be too clickbait-ish. I mean, you have to do a little bit of clickbait to get people to watch your videos, but I wouldn't want to lean into that as my main way to get people to view stuff. Yeah, so most of the time, I think if Bellum was going to send me something they didn't want me to reveal to you guys, they would email me and let me know. Or they would put some sort of message in the box. With this kit, I did open this up yesterday and look at it and make sure that I knew what was in there. Just because I did want to make sure it wasn't like, I don't know, maybe they decide to send me some sort of model that's not going to release for another 6 months and they just want me to paint it in advance or something. You never know. Okay, let's see, how's this arm supposed to go on? Look at my assembly instructions here. Okay, so this arm is totally facing backwards. Like so. Interesting. And this arm, this guy has what I would call a confident LARPer pose. Like a noob in LARP that's not super good at fighting. Keep both of his swords face down towards the ground. Kind of saying, come at me. I think it's funny that you mentioned, like, don't be a Tom Holland, don't be spoiling everything. I've never spoiled anything that wasn't publicly stated somewhere or that we weren't given permission to spoil, at least not that I'm aware of. Who knows, maybe there was something. But I am actually I have an NDA with Bellum for playtesting. So if they did ever send me something they wanted kept secret, they do have a way to enforce that if they ever wanted to. But no, I'm pretty sure they sent me this so that I could get previews, reviews, and tutorials up before the kit releases, or at least get them ready so that the tutorials are coming out alongside the release of these kits. Okay, so as soon as this guy sticks to his base and this glue starts to cure, I'll show you what these two look like next to each other. Okay. So one thing to be aware of, I just used plastic glue to hook these guys to the base, and that's because I know that I'm not going to be taking them off of these bases. If you were thinking of ever rebasing your army, use super glue, not plastic glue, because the plastic glue does melt the model to the base. Okay, get my glue out of the way here. And so here we have the Varangian Guard, and here we have the Athanatoi. Both are pretty cool. Which one do you guys like the look of better? I'm kind of leaning towards these guys just because the fur mantles give them just a little bit extra oomph, a little bit of bulk. But these guys are also really cool. I think both of these are going to look really cool painted up in my color scheme. Anyway, so those are glued together. I guess we'll just start building more models while we're here. I was thinking I would go up until 9 on the stream tonight, which means we've still got another 2 hours and 15-ish minutes left. So I guess we'll build some. Maybe we'll play around with basing a little bit, and we'll just talk. So with my old Dominion, I use plastic glue to hook them to their bases because the basing scheme I have is super simple. They are just walking out in kind of a wasteland area. And so all it is a texture paste that I put on the base, and then I paint it. If I were doing something a little more fancy, like what I've been doing with, say, my city-states. My city-states, I did this cool rock base on this guy. And the theme of their base plates is that they are trashing an enemy camp. So there's going to be bits of, logs from the firewood, or fire pits that have been stomped out, flags that have been knocked down, tents, etc. So with this guy I used super glue because I did basing underneath them. So this has got corkboard here. So it made sense to use super glue. And if you're ever going to, worry about changing your base plates, super glue is the way to go. Which a lot of people might be redoing their bases in the near future because Bellum is actually releasing here, I want to say in April, they're releasing magnetized bases where they come with magnets built into the base plates. Or at least they're designed for slotting in a magnet, so they'll have like I think from what I saw, the design will have a slot here for a magnet and then a spot for a washer on the base plate, and then the kit will come with the magnets and washers that you need. So I think that'll, result in a lot of people rebasing their armies in the near future. Okay, so our second pose uses body 16, or piece 16. And these are body number 2, so I'm going to actually speed this up a little bit. I find when cutting out the main bodies, it is faster to just look at the number on the back of the body than to try to find the number in the instructions. Now the arms, we won't be able to do that, but with any of the leg and cloak pieces, we can find them pretty fast. Okay, and then this says use arms 24 and 23. So I'm going to have to experiment with my additional sprues, but if you look at the arms, on this kit, all the arms have little square knobs that kind of force the arms into specific poses. When I build my second sprue of these, I'm going to experiment and see if the arms can be mixed and matched, like if I can put a different pose on a different body. Because otherwise these guys are going to end up looking a little bit boring once you have a whole bunch of them ranked up, because there's going to be basically 4 of the same, or 1 of the same guy on each sprue. 24 and 23, where are you hiding? Here's 24 and 23, right here in the middle. Okay, and then it says head 19. The heads look like you should be able to switch them around pretty easily. They all fit in about the same, so you should be able to put any head with any body, I think. Do I own any upgrade kits from the Season 1 kit? I have one of the Season 1 organized play kits in the other room. And I think I have the 100 Kingdoms shields, but that is about all that I have access to right now. Benjamin, no worry. So this is the Varangian Guard or a Athanatoi kit, and we built one of each already just to look at them. So Bellum sent me 2 copies of the set, so I could build one in each style. And they're pretty cool. So that's what we're working on building. I think I'm going to build the Varangians, because they're probably the ones I'm more likely to use first. So we'll build their set first, and then I will build more of the Athanatoi later. Okay, piece 25 is what we're looking for here, up top. If I can get into it, it's kind of in a weird spot on the sprue. There we go. One of the concerns I had with these models, compared to like the Legionnaires, these guys don't look super dead. So I'm going to have to, on my end as the painter, make sure that I do a good job of trying to communicate that these are undead. Which is fine. It's just a little extra challenge. Make life interesting. I forgot to cut off one of his legs. Or cut out one of his legs. Here we go. So for anyone wondering, we will not do a live stream on Friday like we normally do. I think how it's going to work this week is I'll just kind of reverse the normal schedule. So normally I would do a video on Tuesday and a live stream on Friday. But I have a family thing on Friday. So we're doing the live stream today. And it worked out nicely because we had this box of models from Bellum to open up and look at. And then, if I can get it finished, my tutorial for this week will release on Friday in place of the live stream. And I say if I can finish it because I have been working on this tutorial, my next tutorial, I've been working on it for about 2.5 weeks. I've been painting the Angron model for 40K, and there's just so much detail on it. It's such a large model. Like, I think I spent most of yesterday just doing the little iron bits across the model. So things like rivets and bolts and trim on armor and stuff. It was insane. By the end of yesterday, I was so tired of painting small little trim details. So a list of favorite factions for me. In Conquest, I'm assuming you're referring to, since that's what we're building. I think mine still remains mostly the same. I think city-states are my favorite, even though I haven't gotten to play them yet, at least not since they released. I might have gotten to play them a little bit during playtesting, but even then I didn't get to... They had already finished most of the city-states playtesting by the time I got in on the playtesting. After city-states, it's Old Dominion, which Old Dominion's my main right now until I get my city-states built out. I think once I've gotten to play both armies in a few tournaments, I'll be able to see which is actually my favorite between those two, because they're pretty tied right now. They both have interesting playstyles that are a little more complicated in some aspects than other armies. And then after the Old Dominion, I guess... Probably be Nords. Nords were going to be my main before the Old Dominion came out. Although I haven't actually touched my Nords in quite a while now. I probably should go work on them some more. And then after Nords, probably Wadroon. And then Spires. And then after Spires, I think the dead last has got to be Dwegome for me. Other than the Leagues of Votann and 40k, I've never really been a huge dwarf fan in wargaming. So, yeah, they just didn't catch my attention as much. That, and I tend to not like armies that play like gun lines in fantasy games. I have 40k for gun gameplay, I guess. And right now, in particular, Dwegome are a rough army. We were making a joke last week at our Conquest game night. We're saying that people who play Dwegome do it because they don't like having friends. Obviously as a joke, because our Dwegome player is beloved by everybody, but that's just kind of the way some people have felt lately fighting the Dwegome. Their gun line's just too good. You only missed one letter in your spelling of Wadroon. There is a silent H in the second half of the name. I believe it's W-A-D, and then I'm trying to remember if it's H-R or R-H. One of those. I'd have to go look at the official spelling. So what I'm seeing is you say that Spires and 100 Kingdoms are the only armies you have, which means you started with your least favorite armies so that you would have to collect all of the armies, right? By starting with the ones you like the least, you'll be motivated to get all the ones that you like more than them. The only army I don't have a full army of is the Dwegome. So I have played all of them at least a little bit. I like to have a little bit of everything. That way I can demo the game better. And in the case of demoing here locally, we do a lot of First Blood, because that's what the... there's only really one store in my area that actually wants us to demo. And their community, their players said that the skirmish game would probably be a better fit for kind of their schedules and the amount of time they spend playing miniatures. So it comes in handy to have an army or a collection for almost all the armies, because when I demo, I can let people know exactly what the playstyle of each army is. Okay, oh, I realized I missed a piece here when I cleaned this piece up. So one thing I'll say about the arms on this kit, this is one of the first times I've had to actually reference the picture in the instructions to see how a piece is supposed to go on. Because they have these little rectangular knobs in them to help you line them up. But even with those, sometimes it's not, like I don't automatically just put it in the right pose. I prefer Last Argument, personally. First Blood's fun. Like, I do enjoy it. But there's something about the way all the models look when there's a ton of them and they're all ranked up on the table. The tactical depth of Last Argument is more my style, I guess. Which is interesting because prior to Conquest, I actually really did not like rank and file games. I always thought they looked really clunky. And part of that's just personal bias, because the local Kings of War community has always been kind of toxic towards like Warhammer and other games. And so back when I was playing a lot of Age of Sigmar, I'd run into them and they'd always make fun of the game I was playing, and kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth when I think about Kings of War. But Conquest I've actually really enjoyed. And then First Blood I enjoy. Like I said, it's a good game. But for me, if I want the skirmish gaming experience, I'll play Age of Sigmar, just because that's the one I was playing before. But like I said, we still play a lot of First Blood around here, because that's what a lot of the other players around here like. And I think part of that is just that, like with First Blood, you can pick up a new army and build the models and not have to spend an arm and a leg. It really only costs maybe $100 to build a well-rounded First Blood force, maybe slightly more, maybe 150 would be more accurate. Whereas a Last Argument army is actually quite the investment to get all the way to 2,000 points. I've always kind of laughed when I hear people talk about how Conquest is cheaper than Warhammer. It is cheaper per model. That is certainly true. But I can get a full 2,000 point army of 40k cheaper than I can get a 2,000 point army for Conquest. Or at least a cheaper competitive army, because I feel like Conquest, to make your army competitive, you have to try more playstyles, which means you have to own more models. So in my opinion, Conquest is not cheaper than Warhammer. Hades and Texas Wargaming, you guys are both right. It's the reason that they were toxic is because they used to be fantasy players that are upset that Age of Sigmar kicked their game out. And then yes, it is more of a people problem than the game itself. I did read the rules for Kings of War, and honestly, if I went back and tried it now, I'd probably actually enjoy it, because Conquest no longer has, to me, what the main difference between their two games was. I never liked that in Kings of War, all your models were on a big base, and they're always on that base. So I liked that Conquest, you would remove models in first edition. Now that they don't remove models, I guess I'd rate them about the same in that aspect. But at least I can still have the option to take my models off the base for my Conquest armies. If anybody is wondering, I do play orcs in Age of Sigmar. I play Orc Warclans as my main. And I do have Stormcast Eternals as well. In fact, I've got the big dragon that they released at the beginning of 3rd edition, and I just haven't painted it yet. My wife got it for me for Christmas the year that it came out, and I built it, and it's been sitting in a box. Okay, let's move to the next model. Sorry, I'm taking just a minute to figure out which model is the next model. Well, now I've got to look at the sprue again, because it only has instructions for 3 poses, but there are 4 bodies on the sprue. Interesting. So I guess the 4th pose on this kit we're going to be building blind, because it doesn't appear to be in the instructions. Which is a little interesting. I've also been looking into... There are 2 more armies I'd like to get for Age of Sigmar. I've started building a Slaves to Darkness army. And by started to build, I mean I have 2 models for it right now. I bought one of the Ogroid characters earlier last year. And I was going to get the new set that comes with the Ogroids, like the army box that they did. But I ended up not having the funds for it at the time that it came out. I think it came out right alongside the Leagues of Votann, which were another army I wanted to buy, so I had to pick which one I was going to buy. And then I also want to get a force of the Sons of Behemat. I'd like to build up a Mega Gargant army. I think those look like a ton of fun. But I have a hard time justifying buying them, because at around, I think it's almost $200 for each giant now, which is a little much for my budget in one go. I usually try to buy smaller purchases and not spend too much in one place. Okay, looking for piece number 39 and piece number 40. I've just lost my train of thought. It was like I zoned out there for just a second, because I looked at the messages and was trying to catch up with them, and then I must be blind. Where is piece number 40? Aha, here it is. There we go. Okay. This is body number 3, so we'll cut out the fur real fast. Seems like these guys would go together pretty fast if I were cutting out all the pieces for one sprue and then cleaning all the pieces for one sprue. They'd probably be able to build the whole set in maybe an hour. And that's going at my speed. I'm kind of slow. So I do have a pretty awesome local game store. I'm actually going there tomorrow. Their default for Games Workshop stuff is about 15% cheaper than everywhere else. And then sometimes if you buy bigger sets, they offer additional discounts at checkout. I'm going in there tomorrow and I'm going to... Unfortunately, tomorrow is like paint restock day. I've got a whole bunch of different paints that are running low or have run out completely. So I'm probably going to drop $100 on paint tomorrow, which I'm not super thrilled about. But I think at least this particular store will probably give me an additional discount for buying so much paint. Okay, that is all the pieces for that one. I've got a couple fun projects going on right now outside of Conquest. So every March I host a little 40K event. We call it March Madness, and it's a team doubles tournament, but the twist is that you and your teammate are not allowed to share any keywords across either of your armies. So you get things like World Eaters and Orcs fighting together, or Chaos Knights and Imperial Guard. It gets pretty fun, but this year I'm hosting it at my own house instead of hosting it at a local store or anything like that. So I have to 3D print a bunch of terrain. So I've got one of my friends working on that. He's 3D printed a whole bunch of 40K style buildings for me. Tomorrow I'm going to be building them all and then priming them and then batch painting them because our tournament's a week from Saturday. So I'm kind of busy right now, which is another reason why I'm worried I won't get my tutorial for this week finished on time. Do I know what model is bigger, Warbred or Minotaur? I do. I know which one's bigger. I have both of them. I want to say the Minotaur is bigger if I remember correctly. But I'll tell you what, I will step away for just a second and grab both of those models and show you. So I suppose it depends on what dimension you're looking at. So Warbred are wider because of their wide stances. So from above, from the side, from the front, from the back. So hopefully that gives you a pretty good idea of how they kind of square up to each other. I think the Minotaurs stand slightly taller, but the Warbred, like I said, they have those wide stances. Also just noticed that this Warbred has lost one of his feathers. That's unfortunate. Minotaurs are probably either my favorite brute kit or my second favorite. They kind of come in at a close tie with the bone golems. Okay, now I gotta remember where I was at cleaning these pieces off. Glad I could help, but anytime you want size comparisons of models, feel free to ask. Luckily, I think about 95% of my models sit in the same room where I paint and record and stream, so can usually take just a minute and dig them out and show you. Now, if it's something that's really buried, I'll just tell you, well, sorry, can't help you. I think the only brute unit I couldn't show you is the fire automata, because I don't actually own any of those. So do you guys think that for next week's live stream, do you think we should paint one of these guys that we're building right now? Or is there something else you guys would like to see me paint? Try to think of some of the options I have. Got all sorts of Wadroon models that need to be painted. I have 100 Kingdoms models, like Men-at-Arms and Knights that we could paint. Got lots of city-states. But I know we've also been doing city-states for the last couple weeks already. When you say, do I have that Drake, are you referring to the Hellbringer Drake? Because I do have one of those. And I don't think it's too terribly hard to get to right now. That would be a cool conversion. I'd look forward to seeing that. Make sure you post pictures of that in the Facebook groups for Conquest. I'm in a lot of them, so I'll probably see it if you do. But carrying like a Roman, or not Roman, but a Greek column would be cool. Bit of ruins in the hands of a Minotaur. I think that would look really cool. Now I'm just trying to picture it. Okay, give me a minute. I will go grab the Hellbringer Drake and we'll show it to you. Are there any models you'd like me to compare it to? Just infantry, or you want actual measurements? Because I can get rough measurements as well. Just finishing up cleaning up this last model, or this last piece of this model. Okay, I'll go get that Drake. Okay, I am back. I grabbed a couple of the most easily accessible Age of Sigmar models I have on hand. So here's the Drake. Change our camera angle a little bit so you can see it better. So I've got the Ogroid character here. I have a Mega Boss. And I also have a Meyer Brute Troggoth. Not a Meyer Brute, or is that what it's called? I can't remember. It's one of the big Troggoth bosses for the orcs. So, I mean, yeah, the Hellbringer Drake's pretty good sized. Mine's a little dusty here, but... yeah, he's got some pretty good bulk to him. Most of the Conquest monsters are pretty good sized. Go put these all back now, so they're out of the way so we can get back to building. Okay, let's adjust our camera back here. Get my glue ready to start gluing this model back to, or not back together, but glue him together. So Conquest scale is a 36 millimeter. Some people say it's 38, but I've always heard 36. So basically everything's a head taller than Age of Sigmar. And honestly, the dwarves in Conquest, the Dwegom, they would be big even if they were at Warhammer scale, because Warhammer's dwarves are really small. Whereas Conquest dwarves are on the large end of the dwarf spectrum. Okay, this one's interesting. This one, if I can get the body to stick together, maybe use super glue on this one. Okay, so this one has his legs, has this weird piece that inserts up inside, so we'll actually put some glue in there as well, just so there's something for it to stick to. Do that on both sides of the torso. Looks like that. There we go. Yeah, so this is bigger than Age of Sigmar, and I think there were two reasons why Bellum chose to do that. So first, the level of detail they could put on a larger scale made it, worth their... It made it worth the extra bulk, like being able to put, more detail into faces, or, when you look at these models, just how much detail goes into their armor. And it's all relevant detail, like sometimes Warhammer has this habit of putting details on models that don't really contribute to the model. They almost sometimes even distract from the overall look of the model. And there's a few models in Conquest that do that as well, but for the most part, they try to go with semi-realistic armor designs, like they're based on historic armors. And then the second reason was for durability of the models. Conquest models, like these weapons, they're able to have wider hafts on them, and especially with spears, it makes them a lot more durable. The only exception I've seen to that is some of the new city-state spears, because of just how long they are. They're still a little bit brittle. But that's one unit with spears out of all the ones that are in the game that I would say has brittle weapons. This one's got an interesting pose. He's totally holding this axe, almost like he's dragging it behind him. The only weapons that do continue to be consistently brittle in Conquest are their, whenever they do a character that's made in resin that has a spear. Those are still, like, no matter how you do it, spears on resin models are always going to be a little bit more brittle than you'd like. And it took me some getting used to when I first started painting these models. They're definitely a different experience from painting a Warhammer model. Just differences in the design philosophy, the design methods. Who knows, maybe even the technology used for injecting the plastic could change how the design goes. But like Warhammer models, all the details that are on Warhammer models are very crisp and like defined, and you know what's what. Sometimes with Conquest models, you don't necessarily know exactly how a piece is meant to look, or like what pieces are meant to be painted what way, I guess. I don't know, I'm having a hard time trying to explain. Edge highlighting Conquest models has always been harder for me than edge highlighting Warhammer models. And I think that's just because Conquest tends to have rounder edges. They're not quite as sharp as Warhammer. And that's not true across all their models, but like in general I've noticed that edge highlighting is harder because Warhammer designs their models specifically for their painting method. And so they design the edges to be very sharp, so they very quickly and easily catch edge highlights. Whereas I don't think Bellum has that same design kind of thought process. They're not thinking about making the models easier to paint as much as they are just making the models look cool and be semi-historic based. Okay, so that's our third Varangian Guard. These guys are starting to look pretty cool once you get a group of them together. Definitely going to have to use these in First Blood. See, I do a lot of dry brushing too. I find that with Conquest models, I actually prefer dry brushing a lot of times over, manually highlighting all the edges. Which you would think wouldn't be the case, because with more rounded edges, you would expect dry brushing to be less effective. And maybe that's just, part of the reason that is the way that, or that is that way, is because sometimes, like with Nords especially, I use a lot of dry brushing on Nords. And that's largely because with them, there are so many details that are, like definite details, and they're different things on the model. But it's all stuff that's made out of leather, so like you paint it all the same color, and then the dry brushing helps you identify that there's actually different straps of leather or different layers of fur or stuff like that. Whereas manually trying to highlight all those little different details, you'll drive yourself crazy because you're looking at the same color for 15 minutes on one model. I feel like I've been rambling a lot this evening as we've kind of just chatted here. And part of that is that I'm just trying to make sure that there's not moments of like awkward silence while I work on the models. Supposedly, it's more entertaining to watch a stream when the person streaming is talking the whole time. At least that's what they say. Okay, so since we don't have instructions for building this particular model, we're just going to kind of pick a head, and I guess this is where we're going to find out if any head goes with any body. The arms will be easy because at this point there's only, I think, one set of arms for the two-handed axes left. Yeah, just this one over here. Welcome into the stream, Czar G-Flea. Good to see you back. I was about to comment that my two regulars aren't here. My two members. And then as soon as I thought about it, you popped up. So when you say there's only 15 minutes, are you referring to you're only going to be watching for 15 minutes? Or what are you referring? Oh, you're referring to previously when I said that you spend 15 minutes edge highlighting one model. I understand now. It's one thing that drives me crazy with live streaming is that I see your guys' messages instantly the moment you send them, but you don't get my response until 30 seconds to a minute later. Okay, so I'm looking through all the arms, and I'm only seeing two arms that aren't connected to swords, so I'm hoping these actually go together. If not, we're going to have a hard time getting this model assembled. Okay, so I think we have all the pieces for him. So I think this piece right here that I'm trimming right now, this arm, is the only piece in the set that like clearly communicates to me that these are undead. Because this is the only arm that has like skinny, rotten looking flesh on it. All the rest of them are so covered in armor you can't tell that there's a dead guy in there. So Czar G-Flea said you've been silent the whole time, just had nothing to talk about, or you've been really engrossed in a project you're working on, or just haven't had anything to say today. I'm not quite sure not quite sure I understand what you mean, Hades, when you say that they're over-designed. I guess I just don't understand what that means in this context. Are you saying like there's just too much detail on them, or they're just not, they're overly complicated, they're not simple enough? Okay, I think I understand what you're saying. So I don't know if I had, like, there are certainly some models where I could say that some of the details are redundant. But honestly, I mean, the guys I'm building right now, for example, they don't come across as overly busy. Because when you account for stuff like, yeah, at first glance, maybe this armor is busy looking, but it's because it's lots of, individual scale plates. It's basically, it's lamellar. It's doing the look it's supposed to look like. I've always felt Warhammer models were much busier in terms of too much detail being on them. But I understand what you're saying, like, these undead definitely don't look super undead. But these ones are, getting all tongue-tied again. These ones also are the, like the elite infantry that are wearing tons of armor. So, I mean, you kind of expect them to look that way. And maybe this is just a matter of opinion for myself, but part of what makes this undead army appealing to me is the fact that they aren't just skeletons wearing armor. I would like to see a little bit more exposed flesh on some of them so I could do the zombie skin. But I do like that this army is undead while also having the capacity to look not undead, because from a painting standpoint, this also means you could paint the army up in a way that represents their past iteration of themselves. Because before they were, an undead army, they were the main human faction that ruled all of the conquest world. And so, kind of like how you would do a Space Marine army in Horus Heresy color scheme, you could totally do an Old Dominion army in kind of how they would have looked before they died. So I think that is kind of cool, but I do agree some of their models don't look super undead, and these are a good example of that. So I get what you're saying. I do. It was honestly a worry that I had for the city-states design. I was worried that they were going to go over the top on the detail on the armor for them. But then when I got them, I was actually pretty happy with kind of the balance they struck. The characters are crazy detailed, but when you look at like their basic hoplites, it's just armor with basic trim around the edges. It's pretty straightforward. The helmets are probably the most detailed part of the model, and then their occasional mechanical limb. But other than that, they're pretty straightforward design. And obviously this isn't a finished model, but... And then, like I said, their characters do go a little crazy on the trim. But that's because they're characters, and characters, in generals are the ones that would wear the crazy detailed armor. I think at the end of the day, a good balance of both is the best. And sometimes, I think overly detailed models become annoying when they're no longer uniform. Like you said, sometimes the models look like individuals rather than line infantry. I think that becomes... That's a problem that orcs in 40k have. So I play orcs in 40k, and it's always... I cannot batch paint orcs. Like, I can batch paint some of their armies, but when it comes to orcs, I have to paint them maybe 1 or 2, at most 3 models in a batch, because they just have so many details that aren't uniform. I think in Conquest, Nords struggle from that the most, because their models are all unique guys that are running around as part of a raiding party. I mean, it fits narratively for that army, but it does make them a little harder to paint when you've got to paint 24 models in the same scheme. Nope, not yet. That piece goes on later. Oh yeah, the orcs being, not uniform certainly makes sense for them. I'm not sure how this model goes together. Okay, that's probably it. Okay, cool. I think every game company struggles a little bit from designing their models in ways that don't make sense. I think the biggest offender I've ever seen is the Vortex Beast for the Thousand Suns and the Disciples of Tzeentch. It's got these huge horns that are coming out of its its chest area, but it runs on all fours, and those horns are longer than its legs. And so it's like, there's no way that thing would ever be able to run or even really move, because its horns would be basically high centering the creature. But I can agree, like Nords, when you build their Huskarls, they have both huge cloaks and massive tower shields, which either one of those by itself is clunky. The two together, they would have a hard time moving, I feel like. Then other models, it does make sense. Like the guys we're building right now, they are more meant to be like bodyguard type infantry. So chances are, when they train, they probably train without the fur mantles and stuff. But then when they would be out walking around escorting a general or something, they'd be all ornamental, because they don't expect the general to actually have to fight. At least that's how I would rationalize the design. Vortex Beast is definitely not one of my favorite models, although my wife, she painted hers. That was her first model she painted like completely from start to finish. And she made it look really nice. She painted it up as like an ice creature. So she did like a glacier effect on it, where its outer layer is white, but you can see bits of like blue and purple coming through the white, as if it were made out of ice and then just covered in frost and snow. But she also switched out the head. She did not like the tentacles. She put the Slaughter Brute head on it, I think. Honestly, you might be onto something there. You might be thinking about it too much. Not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but I could see that being, a thing. I think most wargamers don't think about the models they collect in terms of practicality. And I think companies like Games Workshop know that we don't think about that. Because, look at the Space Marines they just released. They have rocket launchers with 3 different kinds of rockets that each have their own, firing unit. And those are on infantry. If it was on, a vehicle, I could understand. But I think it's okay. I am really liking how these guys turned out. These are a lot of fun. I'm liking them more than I thought they would. And I'm trying to picture my color scheme on them. So I do, if you've watched any of my tutorials on Old Dominion, I do a iron armor base, and then I apply rusting effects to it, so it ends up looking very orange by the time I'm done, orange and brown. But then these guys are interesting because they combine elements of the Cataphractii design into them, because they have these gambeson bits underneath the armor. And on my Cataphractii, which had this same gambeson piece, I painted it like a tan, purplish tan color. So I'm trying to picture that on these guys, and then red trim around the gambeson is what I did on them. And then they've got leg wraps. I guess they do have some flesh exposed down on their legs, where the leg wrap is torn. And then red plumes, iron armor. Yeah, these guys are going to look cool when I get them all painted up. They're going to be a lot of fun. And they've got just enough variety in their layers of armor and stuff that I think they'll look really cool, and they'll look different from the Legionnaires. I think with Conquest, they can get away with having some of those details not be there, like the sidearms. Because you have to consider, when you look at these models, you're not looking at, unless you're playing First Blood, you're not looking at a small group of them. They are standing shoulder to shoulder on these stands, and you might have 5 or 6 stands in a squad. So you're looking at 20 models or more when you look at a squad of them, and they're all close together, they're all pretty similar. And so maybe, unless you're looking for those details, most people probably just don't even notice them. But that's okay, everybody is allowed their own preferences of what they like in their models. Okay, we've got an hour left. Why don't we go ahead and work on assembling the rest of that first sprue of the other squad type. And that'll give me a tray of each to work with on my paint tutorials. Which will be good to have. And I can do a tutorial for each of them. Although, admittedly, their tutorials will be very similar because all my Old Dominion kind of fall into the same uniform look within a little variation, I guess. Does the Minotaur have a sidearm? I do agree, pikemen, anything with a polearm or two-handed weapon should have a sidearm, a dagger, a knife, maybe even a short sword. Having done LARPing and other foam fighting games, whenever I would usually run as a two-hander. I'd run either a glaive or a long sword. And at least when I was running the glaive, I always wanted to have a dagger on hand, because once they get in too close, you just cannot move those glaives fast enough to fight back. And if you don't have good shield users on either side of you, you have to really defend yourself. So I understand. Still curious, Czar, as to what sidearm you're referring to, because I do not recall seeing any additional weapons on the Minotaurs. Although I feel like you could be lining up some sort of joke here too. I'd look at my command sprue here as I'm building this model. Because in the instructions here for building the Athanatoi, it looks like they only give the instructions for building the leader variant for this second model. And so I'm looking at his arm pieces that they recommend and seeing if there are slightly less decorative normal ones on the normal sprue. Because I will do a leader, of course, but not yet. I'm doing just normal guys right now. Well, I guess we'll still use the arms from the commander model, because they're not terribly different from a normal infantry. I think it's just the pose that would change. I guess that makes sense. I haven't built my Haspits yet, so I wouldn't have seen that they had a sidearm for one of them. I've only built the Thyrians, which do not have them as far as I saw. Although I guess if there's one for the Haspits, you could put it on the Thyrian just as easily. So I think all we have to do to make this not be the leader model is to do a different head. Because the main difference on the leader model for the Athanatoi is his head has a more decorative piece on the back. So we'll just pick one and go with it and hope that it fits. At the end of the day, I wouldn't get too upset about it. Like, of the details that could be lacking, I personally would view that as one of the least, I guess the least worrisome, considering that it is a fantasy miniatures game. but that's just me. And I wouldn't worry about debating about it in the chat at all. We're all here to be happy. Well, maybe we're not here to be happy. We're all here to try to be happy, though. Collecting our little plastic soldiers and pushing them around the table. Okay, I think I have all the pieces for this guy. Actually, I cut out extras. Why did I cut out the fur? These guys don't wear the fur. Get that out of here. Well, everyone is allowed their opinion. Out of curiosity, what is it about the lore that doesn't catch your attention? Which I guess comes with also the question, how deeply have you looked into the lore? Because I personally have always felt Conquest's lore is actually quite a bit of fun. It gets pretty... It can get a little confusing in aspects of it, and sometimes knowing where to find all the lore can be a little bit hard. Because that's one thing Games Workshop is doing a little bit better, is that Games Workshop has, 1,000 different places to find their lore. Whereas Conquest, you really only find it in the companion book. There's a little bit of lore in the campaign book as well. Then other than that, it's all on their website, because they do a living world with constantly updating lore, with new narratives going all the time. Which is honestly really cool. I enjoy getting to vote on what happens next in the narratives of individual characters running around in Conquest's world. So I think when it comes to Conquest's lore, the surface lore does a pretty good job of looking basic. And I do wish that Bellum had more access to their lore, wish we had novels and kind of more books to reference. I know there's been a request by some players to put little lore snippets in the army rules so that you know what each unit is narratively. For me, most of the deep lore I've gotten has been from discussions with the designers. And once you get into it, there is a lot going on. But I can see that there is certainly an obstacle getting to that deeper lore, because it's not everybody knows where to find it. You have to kind of know where to look on the Bellum website to find it, because most of their lore is in the form of stories that you can read on their website, and the living world where you get to vote on ongoing narratives. If you don't pay attention to those, I could see how you'd not be able to get too into the lore. Hey Dominic, welcome into the stream. I'm not sure if you just got here or not, but yeah, we got the Varangian and Athanatoi kit Bellum sent me 2 copies of the kit, so I'm building one as the Varangians and the other as the Athanatoi. So right now we're building a couple of the Athanatoi. We already built the Varangians here. And then the Athanatoi. What piece was I working on? Okay, I think we're ready to glue this one together. Thank you, Dominic. I'm glad that you enjoy my tutorials. I was commenting earlier in the stream that I will be making a tutorial for both the Varangian Guard and the Athanatoi. I'll make them as separate tutorials. I haven't decided which I'm going to do first. Chances are the one that I do first will be within the next week or two to try and line up fairly close to when the models release for everyone. But then the second tutorial will probably be delayed another month or so, just because the 2 tutorials are similar enough. I don't want to release them back to back. Because really the main difference between the 2 kits will be that I think I'll add a couple extra steps for the Athanatoi to paint their death masks. That'll add like 3 extra steps to the project. Other than that, the 2 tutorials will be almost the same, because their color schemes are going to be very similar. So it does look like we can take any face and put it with any headdress piece and they'll fit just fine. Looks like they're all designed to have the same little shape on the back, or very similar. Like there might be slight variations in them, but for the most part I think most of the heads will fit with most of the headdresses. Which means that even though these are all very similar, you can have some differences between them. Now, however, it does look like maybe not every head fits to every body, though. Or maybe this one, I think it fits. I'm just looking at it weird. Yeah, it looks like it fits. It works. It just doesn't seem quite as snug a fit as the other one, so maybe I've got the an incompatible head and body. But I'm not seeing any major gaps in the piece, so it might just be the pose too. Guess that's what happens when you experiment. Sometimes some pieces don't go together quite right. At the end of the day, I think the thing that I enjoy about Conquest the most has to be the play style, the game itself. And that's unusual for me to say because I usually do judge a game based on the minis first. And I do love Conquest's minis for the most part. There's a couple that I'm not a huge fan of, but the gameplay is what keeps me here. Like when I first got into the game, I got into it for the models. Now I'm into it because I've been playing the game a ton. Like this is the first game I've actually gone to tournaments for, like large scale tournaments like LVO. So that says a lot about how much I enjoy the gameplay. It's not perfect, especially lately with the new edition and a lot of stuff getting updated rules. There have been a few balance things, but a lot of those are getting fixed. I love that they do a living rule set where they can fix a balance issue within a month or so of the issue popping up. Sometimes even faster if it's a really big issue, which there haven't been too many of those. And it's one of the first games I've played where I can say that I do feel like you could take a subpar army and still do well with it in a tournament. You might not win the tournament if you don't take a army that's optimized, but you could do well. You could still place in the middle of a tournament just fine. And I like that because it means I can take fluffy lists to tournaments and not be punished for it. And I think a lot of that is attributed to the alternating activations and the reinforcement mechanic. I love that your army doesn't start the game completely on the table. You march on the board. Makes it so there's no deployment shenanigans where I win automatically because I know how to deploy my army better than you. And it doesn't come down to first turn roll-offs to determine the winner. Okay, let's see, we're looking for head number 42 here. Checking to make sure it's not on the other sprue. What are the chances that 42 is the head I used? It is the head I used on the other one. Lol. Okay, well we'll do a random head then. So what the mechanic is representing is that your army is divided into kind of the different roles of the army. So your light units are your meeting engagement, like scouting units. Now, not all of them are scouts. Like some of them are rush skirmishers that are meant to go intercept the other army's skirmishers, and then the rest of your army is your line stuff. It's kind of like how you'll see in a lot of battles where the generals will hold back their heavier stuff until the cannon fodder, peasants have gone out to fight, or how they'll hold back cavalry until after the infantry are on the field, depending on, the battle, of course. And it also represents that some things just march slower. Especially when there's things like archers. Maybe you don't want to put your giants right up at the front because you want the archers to get within their threat range and be able to tie them up before your archers get to the battlefield. Or not your archers, but your monsters. Dominic, I don't know where your area is or where you're based, but one thing I'll say is if you go into the Conquest official Discord, you can usually ask if there's any vanguards around, unless you are the vanguard for your area, of course. But if you connect with a vanguard, you can usually find a play group, or at least the vanguard can help you build one around you. I know my group we've built from scratch over the last year or so. We're still not very large. I think we're hitting 8 people here in the next little bit because we just had another player buy into City States. So it's a small group, but in a year going from 0 to 8 people is, well, I guess it was never 0 because I was here. So going from 1 person to 8 people is, I'd say, a good achievement. Especially considering we don't play at a store, we just play at my house. So I think it's important to also note the mechanic doesn't necessarily represent that your army is always holding back. Like sometimes, yeah, it's that you held back something so that it could hit at a more strategically advantageous time. But you also have the reinforcement line, which is a line that goes behind the back of the frontmost regiment of the weight class smaller than whatever your unit is. So if I have a light that's already halfway up the board, then mediums can come on from the sides of the board up to the back of that base plate of that frontmost unit. And so it's representing that those units have flanked from the sides of the battlefield and are coming in on from the sides so they can hit things in their side flanks. And I think when they designed the game, they intended for people to use the reinforcements more to come in from the sides. I've just found that in application, not all units want to come from the side of the field. Just because some units, at least like when I play my Old Dominion, my Bone Golems still like to come from the back edge of the board. Because they move fast enough that they still get up to the front lines about the same time that my line troops are falling apart, and so then they just clean up whatever's left. But I know armies like Nords and Wadroon really like to make use of those side flanks because they have a lot of fast-moving medium and heavy units that can really capitalize on hitting things in the side. Yeah, Dominic, definitely look for a Vanguard. It's one of Bellum's strongest elements of their game is their community, because they really have a huge focus on just building good communities. They have the Vanguard program where they offer all these extra tools to their Vanguards to promote the game, and they help sponsor growing groups by sending them prizes for tournaments and paint and take days, giveaways, all sorts of fun stuff. And if you are the only player in your region, definitely look into becoming a Vanguard. They're working on upping the requirements a little bit for becoming a Vanguard, just because there's been a lot of recent kind of lower quality Vanguards that have come and gone. And so they want to make sure that future Vanguards are a little more well trained. But for the most part, you just need a pair of painted armies and a game store where you're going to promote the game. And then, of course, you need to know the rules, so you need to have read the rulebook a couple times. But once you do that, you can apply to become a Vanguard, and if you get in, you'll get stuff. Like, they will send you models to help keep your armies up to date, and so you can give them away as prizes. It also gives you a direct line of contact with the game designers so that you can ask them rules questions or lore questions whenever you need to. This one's kind of a weird pose. I think it's meant to be that he is like in the process of walking towards his enemies, and he's really throwing his shoulders because he's prideful. I mean, he's one of the elite guys. It makes sense. Give me just a second and I'll grab the Varangians in the background. I personally think they line up side by side really well. Most of the Old Dominion have been like that. The only models that I've had any difficulty with have been the Bone Golems, and that's just because the first few I modeled, I made their arms all flapping out at crazy angles and stuff. Let me just get this guy glued to his base plate. If I can get a base plate out, that is. There we go. Old Dominion are interesting from a kind of a lore standpoint because they're dead, and like some of them, so their gameplay mechanic is that as the game goes along, they remember more from their past life, from when they were still alive. But when they're first reanimated, they don't remember anything, most of them. And so they kind of go from being just animated corpses to being actual soldiers by the end of a campaign or a battle. So what I imagine is this guy has probably remembered a lot of his past life, and so at this point he's like, oh yeah, I got this. But yes, he's got a very interesting pose. So our Varangians here, as you can see, they rank up pretty well. One thing I might do differently, switch this one because he's got his axe kind of sticking out. If you do that, now there's nobody overhanging the stand at all. So yeah, these guys have a condensed enough profile that they're not sticking off the bases. If we look at like our Athanatoi, put Swagger guy up on the front. I haven't built the fourth one yet, but it seems like they're going to rank up pretty well as well. Okay, just one more to build on this tray. And we have about a half hour left in our stream tonight, maybe slightly more. So let's get him built. And then once again, the fourth model on the stand isn't included in the instructions. But it doesn't matter a ton because, as we're seeing so far, most of these pieces don't have to go together in a specific way. The only pieces that have to be put together in a specific way are the ones that are numbered, so the bodies. And then with the two-handed weapons, you want to make sure you get the right arms, so those ones matter. But for the Athanatoi, it doesn't matter what arms you put together. They seem like all the knobs that connect into the shoulders are the same shape, so you just play around with them until you find poses you like. Oh, there I go again, cutting off the fur cloaks that don't go on these guys. I do enjoy that Conquest also does these dual kits. From a game design standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to have one kit be able to use have one kit represent two different units in the game. Makes it so they can get more units out faster. And from a design standpoint, it's also a lot of fun because it means you're left with a lot of bits for customizing your own guys. And I know I've seen with Legionnaires, I've seen people just 3D print generic Roman soldier bodies off the internet and then take the extra arms and make more guys. And if you're not going to be going to any big tournaments, I see no harm in doing that. It's really only in tournaments that you need to have official models. Unless, of course, you're abusing it. There's always one guy that'll abuse people's generosity with using unofficial models, and he'll show up with a Titan made out of trash that doesn't look good and say that it's legal because you guys allowed it. Man, I'm having a hard time getting the clipper in there. There we go. Got this one. So the only thing that I've noticed on the heads, and it is important to keep track of, some of the heads have a more square nub that connects into the headdress, and then some of them have a slightly more rounded nub. And so I'm assuming that the ones with the square nubs will not line up with the headdresses that have the rounded nubs. So, yeah, these ones work together just fine. Perfect. Then it looks like we've got a couple arm pose options. So, Athanatoi are definitely going to be the kit that has more customization freedom, just because you could put any two arms together. All their shoulder pads, I mean, they're not uniform. Like, I think as we can see here, this shoulder pad is definitely a different design than this one. But if you're okay with your guys not being uniform, if you're okay with them being lopsided in their design, you could mix any arms that you wanted. I personally will go for a little bit more symmetrical looking guys because that's just my preference. Okay, that's that one. Your Rogue Idol comment is fair. I actually like the model, but it is dated, it's old. And then Pascal, you're absolutely right. Every army in Conquest plays different. And so, depending on which army you're playing, you do get a different experience from the game. For example, a lot of people... The city-states have only just come out, and a lot of people haven't figured out how they play yet. There was actually a discussion on this in one of the Vanguard discussion groups earlier today. They look like on paper they should play like very aggressive, but how they're actually intended to play is a more defensive reaction-based army where they hold back and wait until the enemy leaves them an opening and then they charge in. And then like armies like the Old Dominion are a very slow-moving tanky army, which is actually really fun because it's an undead army that's actually one of the most elite armies in the game. So they have less models, their models are quite durable, but they move slow. And then armies like the Nords have really fast-moving, hard-hitting units, but they're only wearing t-shirts, so they're not durable at all. They just melt once they get hit by other heavy-hitting units. And then like Spires, their guys are squishy, but they have access to a lot of healing, and so they end up being very endurance-based, but they also have a lot of very aggressive, high-damage output options as well. And then like the 100 Kingdoms, they don't have access to monsters, so they have to play very careful because they don't have a battering ram to break the enemy lines for them. They have to play tactically. When you collect multiple armies, it makes it a lot of fun because you don't have two armies that play the same. So, Dominic, you ask if it's possible to put the furs on the Athanatoy models. I would say yes, it's possible, because for the most part the furs are designed to just kind of sit over the shoulders. What you might run into is if your arm pose is too crazy and out there, the shoulders might not line up right for you to be able to fit the fur over. So you might just play around with the arms. And I suppose worst case scenario, if we wanted to, you could take and do a little bit of converting, because the Varangians, their hands are connected to the axe and not to the arms. So you could go through and take just the hand and chop right there and glue these weapons on the arms of the Varangians, and then your the furs would fit just fine, because then you've got the right shoulders to go with it. And then Pascal, your comment about the city-states, their infantry are definitely going to be fun because you will be taking bigger blocks of units. You might go up to 3x3. Personally, I'm going to try, when I get all my models together, I'm going to try playing with squads of 6 stands, because that number is just slightly more maneuverable and it's slightly less of a points commitment into one spot of the table. But if I find that doesn't work, I'm prepared to switch to running even bigger squads. During playtesting, we had a guy, he ran a squad of hoplites. I think it was hoplites. It's either hoplites or phalangites. He ran a squad of 38 stands, I believe it was. It was his only squad in the army, and he had his character in there. And he played on a board with not a whole lot of terrain on it, so it was mostly open. I think there were just hills and trees, which you can march through. And he was able to show that one squad of guys could basically not be killed by anything. Like, they're not going to be scoring points because they can only hold one objective at a time. But it doesn't matter if your opponent can't break through them. Now, at the time, there was another rule in place that he was testing that proved to be a little too broken when you ran ridiculous, huge squads like that. And then it depends on the unit. So they decreased the points for some regiments if you take them in bigger squads. So when you build your army, you'll want to look through, and if a regiment is cheaper to buy an additional stand for a large squad than it is to buy a whole new squad, then that's usually an indication that they want to encourage you to take that unit in larger blocks. Because if you notice, like, most brutes and cavalry aren't cheaper if you take more than 4 of them. They're the same price per stand. Whereas a lot of infantry, at least line infantry, are cheaper if you take them in big squads. It was very much intentional. Most of the rules design they do for Conquest is an attempt to make the armies more narrative. So sometimes that does mean that if something is too good, they'll have to adjust it either by points or by its rules to make it so that it's less spammable, because it's not supposed to be something that there's a million of in your army. Oops, come on, stick on there. So as I'm building these models, one thing that I think I'm going to end up having to do, I'm going to end up buying an extra squad of these, and I think I'm going to use them as conversion material for making officer models for the rest of the army. Like retinue models to go alongside my characters, because these are actually really cool models. And I could see some of these being converted to look really cool as retinues. Interesting. So one thing to be aware of with the heads, some of them definitely fit with some bodies better than others. So like this head, it fits in the spot that's available and it works, but you can tell it was meant to go with a different body because of just how kind of awkward it looks. Like he's looking down, he's like depressed. Which I guess makes sense. His death mask is broken, so you can see his rotten flesh underneath. You have to move fast on the Founders exclusives. If there's one you like, you gotta buy it right when it goes up for pre-order, because those are a limited time release, and that's their purpose. I personally didn't get the Old Dominion one, because while the characters on it looked cool, if they follow past patterns, The only thing special about that Old Dominion Founders exclusive is the stand that they come with, the kind of diorama base that they stand on. Because they did it with the Dwagome. One of their Founders exclusives had a bunch of retinue models on it. And then when they released the retinue kit later on, it was the 3 models from the Founders exclusive. So really all you're missing out on is the character alternate model that comes in those, and then the decorative stand. Okay, so let's see if we rank these up in the way that makes the most sense for space. There we go. That is about how these guys rank up. Probably their most effective stance. Very cool. I guess now that we've finished a stand of each, we'll go back to the Varangians because we only have 20 minutes, so we'll finish one more model maybe. And let's go ahead and build our standard bearer for this squad. Get an idea of how those banners look. So we're looking for body number 1 here. Oh, that's body number 2. What am I doing? Okay, and then if you're doing the banner bearer, they recommend arms number they recommend piece number 58, which is the standard itself. Be careful when cutting out this banner because these braids that hang off the side look like, if you're not careful with them, you could easily break them off while you're clipping them out of the sprue. Poking them here, they're actually pretty durable. They're more durable than they look. But you can never be too careful. And there's a little bit of extra sprue here that they do for support. Let's clip that off. And then if it's the Varangians, you use the dragon banner topper. Pretty cool little piece, that one. And then if you were doing the Athanatoi, you'd use this this piece here. And then arm 73 for holding the banner. And then axe number 62 for the axe, and it looks like we still use the same arm for his left arm. So piece number 7. Right here. Now I guess we need a head too, don't we? trying to decide here which head I want to use. So we used number 3 on the other guy that used the same pose. I think I'm going to go with piece number 4, which is only slightly different. Oh, we need the furs too. Can't forget the fur. It's always interesting to see how the number of people watching always spikes right before the end. So we only have about 14 minutes left, and I just watched a couple people just drop in. So welcome to those that just barely got here. It's good to see you. Thank you for dropping in. I agree with you there, Czar. If you were thinking of getting into Old Dominion for like a First Blood army, I can definitely recommend these guys. I think they'll do really well in First Blood. I mean, we don't actually have their... I don't think we have their rules for First Blood yet, because First Blood, they don't release the rules until the kit is ready to release, so they'll probably come out within the next week or two. And I think they do that so that when they do their rules testing and stuff, they can really focus down on making sure each new unit that comes into the game fits in with the balance of First Blood. Yeah, First Blood's really interesting because they try to zoom in on they try to represent even more of the lore of the units and how they would function as individual models. But I imagine with how these guys are in normal Conquest, in First Blood they've got to be pretty elite and they've got to hit pretty hard for infantry. I'm actually probably going to include them in my First Blood armies in the future. Hey David, welcome into the stream. Sorry you couldn't be here at the beginning. Luckily, you'll be able to, if you want to catch the beginning, you'll be able to go back and watch the beginning. Because I think about 30 seconds after I end the stream, it converts it into a video that you can watch anytime you want. I'm looking forward to getting to try these guys in First Blood because the Old Dominion in particular have felt a little bit hard to adapt into First Blood. Their infantry are really interesting. The Legionnaires in First Blood all have the support rule, which means you actually have to keep them back about 2 inches away from your enemy when you're fighting, because once they get within an inch, support actually hurts them. And where I have mostly Legionnaires in my Old Dominion collection, I've actually really struggled to win very many games in First Blood. But these guys should kind of change that because they're infantry that are going to have good defense and be able to deal out some damage. You know, Hades, we did spend quite a bit of time kind of going back and forth there. There's nothing wrong with that, though. It didn't get out of hand or anything, so everybody's entitled to their opinions and their preferences. And I like to play a lot of games. Conquest is probably my favorite fantasy right now, but I do still like Age of Sigmar. I just don't get to play it very often these days because thanks to the old Warhammer Fantasy guys that play Kings of War, Age of Sigmar's never really been able to take off in this area. I'm also really looking forward to Warcrow. Don't know if you've heard of that one, but it's being made by Corvus Belli, the guys that make Infinity. So they made their dungeon crawler version of the game last year and did that on a Kickstarter thing. This year, in the fall, they're supposed to do a similar Kickstarter, but for the actual full war game version where it's not just a dungeon crawler board game. And I'm very curious to see how they do fantasy, because the way they do sci-fi is really cool. So First Blood versus Conquest, last argument. They both have similar mechanics in terms of they have the same phases, kind of the same order of play, but where they're different is in the special rules and the way the units work. So in First Blood, so in normal Conquest, you know, we've got the trays. In First Blood, you would have your leader model, and then every other model in the squad has to be within 5 inches of him. So you could spread out your units like this and have the leader over here. Then if you have a standard bearer, say this guy here was a standard bearer, he could be 5 inches away. And then the range of that squad would extend off of him now. So you could have guys clear back here that are taking their range off of him instead of the leader. So placement is a lot more fluid, I guess you could say, which makes for some very interesting model placement. It's obviously a lot less models and a lot more terrain, so it's quite a bit of fun. I still prefer Last Argument more, but that's just because I have other skirmish games I can play if I want a skirmish experience, whereas this is the only rank and file game I play. And like I said, part of it's my Old Dominion, since that's the army I play for my main right now. I've had a hard time getting a playstyle for them that I enjoy in First Blood. I think city-states are going to actually become my First Blood army that I like the most, because they seem like they have enough tools to survive against just about any build. If you want to have an excuse to play both systems, I recommend running a Conquest map campaign from their campaign book, which they are making a new one later this year. Because the map campaigns have scenarios where you fight both First Blood battles and Last Argument battles to determine the outcome of a control of a territory. Hey, if you're ever in Rexburg, Idaho, you can go take on the old Kings of War players. Be my guest. Really, if I wanted Age of Sigmar to take off again, it would just be a matter of finding a few players that are interested, because I already host most of my games here at home anyway. And I have all the terrain, I have the tables. I just have to find interested people. And I have a couple. We played Age of Sigmar a couple weeks ago. Well, a couple people did. I didn't. I sat and watched because there was an odd number of us, and I think I was actually playing Conquest at the same time too. Come to think of it. Oh, interesting. So this particular arm is interesting because he's not keeping his stance close to his body like some of the other arm poses do. And so it kind of threw me off at first there because I'm like, wait, this isn't sitting right. But no, that's how it's supposed to be. I'm pretty sure if I am ever in Sydney, Australia, you'll know about it because I'll probably make a video about it on my channel and announce it to everyone. I think that would be cool to go down that way. I know there's actually a pretty healthy Conquest community down there. In fact, one of the main rules designers is over that way. I'm not sure where in Australia he is. But I want to say he's towards the Sydney side of things. I don't know, I'll have to ask him. Okay, let those pieces dry for a minute. We are almost out of time tonight, but I'm going to try and get this model finished, and we might even go just a little bit over, just so that we can see how the standard bearers look next to all the other guys. We're going to get this guy glued to his base before we put the standard on, and I think we're going to use super glue for the banner, not plastic glue, because I suspect that it's going to be annoying to sit here and wait for the plastic glue to cure while also having to manually hold the weight of the banner up for him. Now, don't judge me too harshly. This bottle of glue is almost at the end of its life, and so it's looking pretty rough on the outside. Let's see, so this guy's supposed to have his weapon just hanging down at his side. Just like that. Yep, that works. Little dab of glue right here. And I think what we're also going to do is put a little dab of glue on the bottom of the banner and glue it to the base plate. That way it's got 2 points of contact. Uh-oh. Maybe. Let's see, so I think the arm actually fell down a little bit as it was drying because it's not sitting high enough up. Try this again. There we go. If I can do it without knocking him off of his base. Banners are probably my least favorite thing to glue together in any game. Okay, well, he's together. As long as we don't bump him too much, he'll stay together. Let's pull one of the models off of this stand and throw him on there. Nope, 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 he's gonna fall apart on me. This banner just does not want to glue. And it's my own fault because I used plastic glue on his shoulder joint, and then I think I used too much super glue on the contact point with the hand. We're just going to hold this for just a minute. Okay, there we go. So with the banner on the stand, it still ranks up pretty well. The banner's a little awkward looking, but that might have just been because of how I glued it together. Need to get these guys magnetized so they don't topple over every time I bump them. I do really like the banner on these guys. Very fancy. Anyway, that is, I think, where we're going to call it a night tonight. And be watching for a tutorial on one of these. I think we'll do a poll to see which tutorial I do first. And then the tutorial will be probably end of next week, maybe even early in the week, depending on how ambitious I'm feeling with my painting. And yes, Hades, Old Dominion has cataphracti, which are basically these guys, but riding on horses. Is the best way to describe them. They're pretty cool. I enjoy them, although they do need a little bit of balancing in the game, in my opinion. They're not as lackluster as they used to be. They got a little bit of a... They got toned down a little bit in one of the recent rules updates. But they're still fun. I have like 9 of them, I think, so 3 squads of them. Texas Wargaming, I'll answer your question real quick, and then we'll call it a night. So, I have these little metal discs here that I got off of, I believe, eBay. And I put those on the inside of the base plates. And then I have these little magnets here that are, I believe, 3mm thick magnets. And I think 5mm wide. And I put those on the bottom of the base plate. And I do it just slightly in front of the little center knob. That way it doesn't stick out beyond the edge of the base plate at all. And then I just stick them on. I don't have a magnetized stand on hand to show you what they look like when they're done. But anyway, thank you guys for watching tonight. Our next live stream will be not this Friday, but the Friday of next week. My next tutorial will either be this Friday or Tuesday of next week, so be watching for that. Have an amazing night, and we'll catch you in the next one.